Hey, hey, let it line up. I don't say that I have a favorite bike because I don't think that that would be a really right thing to say. I mean, our bikes are like kids, right? But if you told me that I had to pick one bike, I think we're probably looking at it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for tuning in once again. This is my 2006 Bianchi Pinella, and it's a steel frame. It's called Boron Steel. This frame actually has a very interesting story, which I'll get into in a minute. I started my cycling venture back in 1989, and of course back then everybody rode a steel frame, and my first frame was a Benotto 800 series with Modolo components, and I thought the bike was the bee's knees until I actually had the bike hoisted by a fellow cyclist who just laughed because the bike was so heavy. I went home, got on a scale, weighed the bike, and found out that the bike weighed 28 pounds, which was about 8 pounds more than what anybody else's bike was weighing at the time. So from there, I got into aluminum frames, Cannondales, a few other steel frames. Eventually, I ended up riding an Eddie Merckx Team SC for a very long time. Phenomenal bike. If you ever get your hands on one of those, that's a great bike to own. I was very reluctant to get involved with carbon frames because I thought it was all hype and stuff like that until I rode one called Nago EPS. And I eventually transferred to riding carbon frames just like everybody else. The performance was just outstanding. I always remembered about the feel of steel frames because that's one thing, is that carbon and aluminum in certain instances may be better than a steel frame in terms of performance, but in terms of ride feel, I'd have to give the nod in that department to a steel frame. So I always loved and lusted is the word that I'll use after a Bianchi frame, a steel frame in Celeste. But back then I either couldn't find one in my size or they were too expensive. The timing just never seemed to be right. Even though I did own other Bianchis throughout the years, I owned several Bianchi aluminum frames, namely the EV4s. One day I was on eBay and I found a Bianchi Campione. I believe that frame was from 1997 with a 1-inch head tube. And the frame, it came frame only, no fork, and I decided to purchase the frame. And my objective with the bike was I challenged myself to get the bike down to 16 pounds. The reasoning is that a steel frame that weighs 1,800 grams, which is 4 pounds, compares to a carbon frame that weighs 900 grams, 2 pounds. So if you can get a carbon build down to 14 pounds, you should be able to get a steel frame build down to 16 pounds. So I found an Easton EC90 SLX 1-inch steerer tube fork for that frame and managed to build a bike with Campagnolo Record 10 speed, zip 202 tubular wheel sets, and I actually got the bike down to 16 pounds. It was a great riding bike, but the material of the Bianchi Campione, which is the Dacii Zero Tray, was not the best in terms of the quality of steel. So I always liked the Pinella. I just was never able to really find one in my size. A gentleman had the frame on sale on eBay for quite some time. And I think this frame was listed for about 3 or 4 months, but there was something about the listing that was a little bit sketchy. It's almost like the guy wasn't saying everything that was actually wrong with the bike. One thing was evident was that the seat tube right around that junction was busted, but he had it taped up with duct tape and it was sprayed over. You couldn't tell the extent of the damage. And also there was a little bit of deformation to the head tube. And after a little bit of going back and forth and me making an inquiry to a frame fabricator and painter about the feasibility of replacing the seat tube and the cost of doing that, I decided to jump in and do it. When I received the frame, my suspicions were correct. The frame was in worse shape than what I had anticipated, but I was all in and the frame was sent off to be rebuilt and resprayed. When I initially spoke to the fabricator about the repair work, we talked about simply painting it, repainting the bike in Celeste with the Bianchi decals. And after I got off the phone with him, I stopped and I thought about our conversation for a few minutes. So I called him back and I asked him, I said, hey, are you familiar with the Marco Pantani paint scheme, the Mercantone Uno paint scheme? And he said, yeah. In fact, they had recently resprayed a bike in that color scheme. And I said, that's what I want you to do for my frame. So we decided that the bike was going to be sprayed in Celeste and Mango. I purchased the decals, sent him the decals because I wanted the decals done a certain kind of way. And he had the frame for about 3 months. Completed the work, beautiful. When I received it, I was the work was beyond my expectations. So I obtained a fork, a 1 1/8 inch fork from the Bianchi FG Lite. Great bike, by the way. I'm on the hunt for one of those with the full aluminum frame in size 53. If you know where one is, please let me know. I've owned several aluminum Bianchis. Like I mentioned, I've owned about 3 or 4 EV4s. I've owned one FG Lite, but the FG Lite I owned was the carbon rear stays, and that's not what I wanted. I decided to build a bike with the Dacia cockpit, Campagnolo Record 11, white label, 11 speed. The wheel set is Fulcrum Racing 1s, wrapped in Vittoria Corsa tires. The bike rides beautifully. It weighs in right around 15.5 pounds. I did recently swap out the stem for this FSA, which was part of the tribute that Bianchi did with the Specialissima to the Mercantone Marco Pantani paint scheme. I think I like the bike better with the black stem that I had, the Dacia Superlegerra, but right now that's what's on it and that's what's going to stay on there. The saddle is a Selle Italia SLR Boost Kit Carbonio. I was blessed to be able to find it in all black without the red accents. The bottle cages are titanium bottle cages that I obtained on eBay, and I think it actually doesn't take away from the aesthetics of the frame. This frame rides phenomenal. It's kind of like my special occasions bike. I've had it out of town a few times. I've actually taken it up to Orlando and ridden the hills in Claremont with it. It's a great climber, phenomenal descender, and it tracks awesomely on the flats. One of the things that I like about this bike, in comparison to a carbon frame, you know, down here in Florida, our cycling needs are different. We don't really need a super lightweight bike. And one of the things about a super light carbon bike is that, you know, they accelerate great, they get up to speed great, but you almost feel like you're always keeping the bike up to speed. It doesn't hold momentum. It's like it doesn't have the same level of inertia that a heavier frame has. And this bike does that better. I prefer to be on the front of a pace line on this bike than on my carbon frame, simply because despite the aerodynamic advantage there, simply because it just feels like it just holds the speed or momentum better. Now, there's no comparison in terms of overall performance between a well-made carbon frame and a well-made steel frame. The well-made carbon frame is going to beat the well-made steel frame every single time. I know I'm part of the Steel is Real club as well, but I'm simply telling you what my experience is. If I were to go on a very fast group ride where I felt there's going to be a bunch of surges, accelerations, and things like that, and I want to be able to stay in, I'm on my carbon frame. If I'm on a ride where we're riding a steady pace line, and we're just riding tempo, this will probably do it just as well, if not a little bit better. If I had to give an overall difference between the feel of a carbon bike build and a steel bike build, I've struggled with coming up with the words to describe the difference. I would say that if we use a steel bike build as a standard, I would say that a carbon frame feels flimsy in comparison to a steel frame. Now, I know people probably aren't liking that term. I'm not saying anything derogatory about carbon frames. I own several and I love them. But I'm simply telling you that the feel, the robust feel, like it's built like a tank feel that you get from a steel frame, you're not going to find that in a carbon frame. It just feels different. Carbon frames go through bumps and road imperfections and they soak them up pretty good, but they let you know, hey, we just went over a bump, but we took care of it. When a steel frame goes over a bump or road imperfection, you're like, did we just go over a bump? That's kind of the difference that I feel between the two. The steel frame just kind of goes through it. But if you are an avid cyclist, if you're passionate about this sport, if you've never ridden on a good steel frame, a good quality steel frame, I encourage you to find one in your size, one that's well built, made out of excellent tubing, and I think you'll be surprised at how much you'll enjoy riding that type of bike around. Everybody should own a nice steel frame at some point in their life. So that's our story about our Bianchi Pinella, aka Penny, and I hope you enjoyed this video. As usual, our aim here is to inform, instruct, inspire. Be blessed, guys.